This is Sarah Heredia, and you are listening to the Freely You podcast. Our time together is meant to inspire you to think bigger and empower you to live your life in a way that makes you proud to be you. I believe that the only box you should fit in is the one that you build for yourself, and I'm here to help you lay the foundation. My journey has taught me that we all deserve to create our own definition of success while meeting ourselves with love and a playful curiosity. My goal is to provide practical tools and fresh perspectives so you can rewrite your story, start living your life on purpose, and ultimately become more freely you. All right. Hello and welcome back. Thank you, as always, for joining me today. I'm really excited for today's conversation and not going to lie, like a little apprehensive. I was actually just talking to my dear guest, Emily Sheets, about this. It is a big conversation. And so I have Emily on the podcast today, who you probably know at this point. And if not, you're in for a treat today. But Emily is a friend of mine. She is a colleague. I co-host our women's community, The Nest, with her. And she's an incredibly talented intuitive healer. She specializes in theta healing. If you don't know what that is, you can always explore her page on Instagram at Mission Soul Ignition. But Emily has been a frequent guest on this podcast. She's somebody that I love having these kind of more serious conversations with, because I just think that she has great perspective and knowledge and wisdom. And it always provokes thoughts for me. So I hope it does the same for you today as we dive into this conversation surrounding the mother wound and what that actually means. And just to be fully transparent, there isn't a real agenda for this conversation. So we are intuitively just seeing what comes through here and knowing that whatever is meant to will. So without further ado, hello, Emily. Welcome back.
Hello. So happy to be here. I'm really excited for this conversation. I just have to say how feminine of us to be just letting this conversation flow.
Totally. Yes, I love it for us. And I do think I think that usually when I plan a podcast, just so you guys know, because I don't think I've ever shared this process, but when I have a guest, I generally create like 5-ish questions that are going to keep me and my wild mind on track. But with this conversation, it could be so broad. There's so many things that could be covered in this conversation that I'm just trusting that between Emily's own experience with this and my experience with this, it's going to be something that you all need on some level. And so that's really the goal of this conversation, is to raise awareness around the mother wound and how it actually impacts us, what it actually means, and how it might be showing up in your life and what you can do to process it and begin to heal it. So I think we'll just dive right in, and I'd love to just get your perspective, Emily, on what is the mother wound for those listening that are like, well, do I have that? Do I have to be a mother to have that? Like, what are your thoughts on what it is?
No. If you had a mother, which all of you do, if you're listening to this, you had a mother in some capacity because you exist. And I think anybody with a mother probably has some degree of a mother wound, because all of our mothers were human. And, with that comes like human challenges, just like life and priorities. And I don't think there's no such thing as a perfect mother that I have encountered in this world. And well, so what I want to say to that, though, is that all of our mothers did the best they could with the knowledge that they had, and the knowledge and the tools and the wisdom that is available to us today, in terms of like even being able to recognize what this is and how to heal it. And that just wasn't available And so even if you're listening to this conversation today, I feel like there can be, if you are a mother or even just like a plant mother or a dog mother, we mother all things all the time as women. Or if you're a man listening to this conversation, you probably have women in your life that are in the mother role in some capacity. And so just refraining from shame and self-judgment around, oh, wow, I see how this wound has shown up in my life. And wow, I have actually been kind of continuing that pattern on my own. Let's just take a pause if you're feeling like that, taking a breath, recentering yourself, because this is just the journey of being human. We're all here to learn lessons. And I also just feel called to say as well, if you are a mother and you're listening to this and you're like, wow, I've done that to my own child, I want you to know that from the higher perspective, I go a little woo-woo sometimes. From the higher perspective, your souls chose each other as mother and child, and that child came here to learn lessons just like you. And so the imperfections and the way that you've shown up in this role of mother or in a relationship to a mother, it is part of life's journey. Okay. So I just wanted to say that before we start talking about all the ways this shows up, because it can be really easy to just be like, oh crap. Okay. So now that we have that little disclaimer out of the way, what I see the mother wound is, I've really been reflecting on this because I knew this conversation was coming up. And there's so many ways I see it show up. And the thing is it's not created in a vacuum, right? We have masculine and feminine energies in our life. And so I've always been kind of trying to determine what is that mother wound versus like a father wound. And the reality is that both energies are important in our life, and a lot of things can be blurry when we try to do just cut it apart almost, of oh, this is my feminine energy or the mother wound, and this is my masculine energy or the father wound. So with that, I want people to know that it's not always as cut and dry as we think it is. But in general, the mother wound to me is all about your relationship to your emotions, and having a healthy relationship to emotions, especially difficult emotions like grief, like anger. Resentment is a very feminine, to me, when I have a lot of resentment coming up, that is a sign to me that I'm in my mother wound. When we are using our voice to speak and we're afraid to speak our truth, that's a way that the mother wound can show up. Also, I really look at the feminine energy, the mother wound, the way. So when I say the mother wound, I'm really talking about the ways our feminine energy has been wounded, which are many. If you look at the millennia of how women have been treated on this planet, where we're at today, it's light years ahead, even of maybe 150 years ago. So there's so many ways this can show up, but really it's about your emotions, and then also how you care for yourself, how you nurture yourself and others. And also the energy of abundance is something that comes up a lot with the mother wound, and lack. So when we talk about lack and scarcity, I see scarcity as a masculine wound and lack as a feminine wound. And it really has to do with getting our needs met, and especially our emotional needs. And that starts with the mother at birth. And so, I'm sure we have all kinds of people listening. I've actually been talking about the mother wound on my page lately. And I had somebody that was like, what happens if I'm adopted? We have all these different ways that we come into the world, and ways that our mothers have shown up for us in our life or not shown up for us in our life. And that really does impact our emotions and the way we care for ourselves and the way we nurture ourselves. And feeling that sense of fullness and wholeness, to me, is what I would say is the healed feminine energy, the healed mother wound of like, I have a good relationship to all my emotions. I feel taken care of and supported in my life, allowing the help that I need in. And gosh, there's just so much, so many different ways this interplay of healed feminine energy and wounded feminine energy can come up in our lives. I think I'll stop there, but there's like definitely a couple of examples that I see a lot within myself and other people. So it doesn't have to be like I had a strained relationship with my mom. Yes, that can definitely create a mother wound, but it also can be little things like maybe your mom had to send you to daycare, and that has an impact on your little human brain growing up. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Sarah. And what do you think of all that?
Oh my God. Yeah. So much, so much. That was a beautiful, beautiful just description. So thank you. When you were talking about like, what it looks like, what it feels like, it's like when we're healed, or what it is to have like pure feminine energy that is healthy. The only thing that I was thinking, like you talked about the emotions, I was thinking about safety too, like having that, knowing that you're safe, feeling that you have been protected and guided, and having that inner knowing. I think that also comes from our relationship with our mother. And not necessarily our relationship, because like you said, it isn't always about like, well, me and my mom have always went at it. It really does have to do with, like you said, a mother can only give her child what she has to give, right? And so that starts in the womb in pregnancy. And it's like, if the mother is having all of these, if she's wounded from all the generational things, which I know you talk a lot about that, and so I'm excited to dive deeper into that. But chances are the mother is wounded from her mother, who's wounded from her mother, and the cycle continues. And so when you're pregnant, if you're stressed, if you're depressed, if you're anxious, if you're all these things, the baby we're already taking that on. And like, that's why they say like the birthing experience is so profound as well, because if you're immediately greeted into the world with high stress and trauma, that can impact you as well. And then like you're saying, Emily, like in our society, especially in the United States, there is a major lack of prioritizing the mother's time with the baby. And like, it is like science says, the baby needs the mother. Like, there is that physical need. They are getting all of their safety, their security from being in proximity to their mother. And the interesting thing about that, because you mentioned like adoption, and one thing that like is, even with, if you were missing a mother figure, even if you had a really present father and a nurturing father, you can still be left very wounded, because we actually need that feminine energy and that connection that we have from our creator, essentially, and from, where we came from. So I think that one thing, what you started this whole thing by talking about, like, first of all, I love that you mentioned the men, because I'm trying to involve the men more in these conversations. My dad listens to my podcast sometimes and he's like, you never talk to the men. And you're absolutely right. You don't have to be a woman to have a mother wound. You don't have to be a mother to have a mother wound. Like, we all have a mother. And so this conversation is for men as well. But the shame thing, I think, is really big. And I also know that my mom listens to this podcast, and I can only imagine like me giving her zero notice. This is coming out and her like shitting her pants. Like, what is my daughter about to say here? So I love you, Mom. But it's like that shame piece, because as I've been reflecting on this whole topic, there's been a lot where I have, rather than looking at my own childhood, I can't help but look at myself as a mother and like stir up these feelings of guilt and shame, because nobody's fucking perfect. And if I could go back 12 years, 13 years, there's a ton of things that I would have done differently, you know? And so it's really not about shaming or blaming or feeling guilty or wishing that you did things differently and for, yeah, all mothers out there listening. But it really is about just understanding why we are the way that we are and understanding why we are is sometimes continuing these cycles unknowingly, and just choosing to do better and choosing really to heal ourselves so that we can heal that wound that we've created for our children as well. And so I just think that's a really big thing to touch on. And I love that you said, I was like almost brought to tears immediately when you said like you were chosen for this role. And so there are things that feel hard and that feel heavy and that it sucks that you have to process. It feels like that. And there was no one else that was supposed to process these things besides you and your mother or your children. And like, it's a really important role to play. And that's why I think that this conversation is really important, because it's not about tearing apart mothers and like, we should all be doing better. And like, you know, we're so damaged. There's an opportunity here, and there's an opportunity to heal this more collectively, because like you're saying, women in society, like, let's just call it what it is. We've had it rough, you know? And so, yeah, we have been objectified and we've been judged and we've been not treated fairly. And, you know, all those things, they build over time. And so I really hope that you can see this conversation as just like enlightening and an opportunity to do better. But as far as what you said about the mother wound versus the father wound, I agreed with everything you said. I think for me, I think of the mother wound really, it does happen a lot internally. It's a lot of our own like battle with ourselves, our love, the way we nurture, take care of ourselves, the confidence we have in ourselves. And I see the father wound as like that masculine, like how we're showing up in the world, how we're interacting with other people. Yeah, more of that, the external. And I don't know if you agree with that part, but that's kind of how I have like compartmentalized that.
Yeah.
So I'd actually hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Yeah, you're totally right. It is the action part of us. It also, to me, like, so it's interesting you talk about safety. And this is why I was like, I don't know that we can talk about just the mother wound in a vacuum today, because there's so much that goes into it with the interplay of men and women. So I really see safety and trust and stability as a healthy masculine energy as well. So it is within. And you know, when I work on people that have father wounds, or I've worked on my own father wound, it's also this sense of worthiness that really damages the masculine energy, and like the self-worth and how you see yourself and your self-identity, I also see as masculine energy. So, you know, when a mother, so when we bring it back to the mother, and yes, a child, so energetically, your child shares an auric field, an energetic field with the mother for the first 7 years of the life, in various degrees. Obviously, when the baby is in the womb, you're still kind of like one, but beginning the separation process, which is the maturity, growing to adulthood process, is really kind of like separating from the mother slowly. But the baby and the child, even after it's born, will have like will share the field with the mother. And so the baby's taking a lot of cues from the mother. And so the safety of the mother is important. And if you've been a single mom, or if you felt like you've been in that role, yes, you've had to provide that safety. You know, providing is another very masculine thing. Giving is another masculine energy. So you can see how these start to kind of intertwine, where it's like you can't really have one with the other, and all people have their own masculine, their own feminine energies within. Um But, if there's a father figure that's not present, or a father figure that has maybe poor relationship to their emotions and they're angry all the time, or they're explosive and they're just really they feel dangerous to the mother, that's going to affect the baby like 100%. And so you can see how it's like, okay, so then the father's relationship to their mother and their emotions can directly impact the safety and the trust and the stability that the mother needs to really hold that space for their child. Um, so it's like we try to separate ourselves a lot of times. And I started this conversation by saying that, but it's like we really need each other. We need each other to be our healthiest, best selves. And I think that's another part of the mother wound of like when we feel like we have to take it on all ourselves, like we are the provider, we are like we have to do everything. We provide the safety. We also help like nurture people and care for people and their emotions. And that is a sign that you have a little bit of imbalance. But the reality is that is life right now. That's how society is set up. And so we are not set up to really have this healthy balance in the masculine and feminine energies, or even like begin to address where some of these things come from, you know?
Yeah, that's such a valid point, especially for our generation, you and I, and beyond anybody older than us, I would say, because really I do see, and it's very uplifting to see that the roles are changing. Like I know in my household, like it's a 50-50 household, and that is just not the way that it was. There was very defined roles of the mother is the nurturer, the caretaker, and the father is the provider. And that was like very cut and dry for an extended period of time. And so it's refreshing to me to see that we're getting away from that. And hopefully that is helping that balance that you're talking about. One thing that you were talking about with the being a baby, it's like those cues, and a baby is taking in cues specifically from their mother because they know their mother. They literally feel their mother because they have been part of her, connected to her, in her. And so even if your mom is very attentive and caring and nurturing, if she is having all these other things that she's dealing with in her own personal space, that's going to come through in even her facial expressions, in how happy she is, in how, maybe she is caring for you, but maybe she's not happy in that moment. And the baby takes that on. So I think I have found that in my own reflection, because my mother is actually very nurturing, and that's like when you're sick, you want your mom, right? And as a 40-year-old woman, when I am sick, I still want my mom, that like nurturing love. And so, but even you can be nurturing and you can be like a caregiver, but if emotionally you're drained or not available, then there is that lack on the baby's end. And I think that's what you were talking about, the lack earlier. It's like the lack of all these things that we need, whether that is the nurturing portion of it, whether that is the protection and the safety, or whether that is like the guidance and like the encouragement and the showing them the path, or whatever it is that you need from your mother. They might not be able to give you all of those things. And so I think that sometimes it's like you are like, well, it can be confusing because you're looking at your mother and you're like, well, I don't know why I'm like this, because like she was good at this or she was good at this. Nobody's perfect, right? So chances are there was a ball drop somewhere, and that might be what you're seeing now. But I think the hard part, at least for me in reflection, is that we don't remember our childhood, and like we don't have, this will hopefully open a conversation with my mother at this point, but I know like you don't have your mother physically present to like ask those questions of like, what did that look like? And like, were you like, how did you feel after you birthed me? Were you happy? Were you excited? Were you depressed? Was it a lot? Were you overwhelmed? Like, what did that even look like for you? Because we don't have those answers because we don't remember that far. And most of us aren't having those conversations with our parents over dinner. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they're not the easiest conversations to have either. Um, and geez, there's so much I want to say. It's like, what direction do I go here? One thing I'll say is the more that I get in touch with my feminine energy, my true authentic feminine energy, which, I just have to say too, you know, society is a male dominated society, has been for a really long time. Um, and no shame to men or anything like that, but it's just the way society is set up. It is set up around the doing and the action and like yeah, just like the status and all those things that are can be like the unhealthy male ego energy. And where was I going with that? Um, it's just it's most of us have this part of ourselves, this deep feminine part of ourselves that hasn't been allowed to be fully expressed, fully felt, fully embraced, just because of how society's set up. And with that, I will say the more I have healed these both parts of myself, the father, the masculine side, the mother, the feminine side of myself, I actually gain access to those memories, is what I was saying. And which sounds really weird, but I literally have been processing just so in the last month the shock, right? So I was going through without getting like into my story and stuff, I've gone through a lot of like shocking moments in my life, and that was coming up. It was like really dysregulating my nervous system. I was feeling really triggered by like energy that felt like a shock. And so I was processing that, and what I was able to recover was that, yeah, just the moment I was born was so shocking. And that was like kind of my first introduction to the world. And I could feel how my mom was very stressed and nervous. And I'll share something personal as I know that my mom lost a full-term baby before she had me. And that has had profound impacts on me because my mom was very anxious pretty much the entire pregnancy and after birth for a very good reason because she had this very real experience in her life of a loss and of a child, and she didn't have the tools to navigate that or heal that within herself. So a lot of my imprinting from day one and pre-birth was shock, anxiety, like just nervous energy. I could feel my nervous system getting a little nervous even talking about it because it's just so deeply ingrained to me. And so, gosh, I guess I'm sharing that just to show like how profound like the emotional energy of the mother can have on us. And it's not also a malicious thing. Like my mom she was anxious because she wanted me to be healthy and be alive and be here. And so I've just had a lot of interesting ways that that has impacted my life of like, okay, I'm healthy, but I need to be anxious at the same time. Literally like the imprinting of the emotions of like, oh, being healthy is being overly anxious and like tracking all the calories and like being anxious of how you relate to other people. A lot of that imprinting came from those moments of my life. So it's a very profound how it affects people, and it's usually not a malicious thing at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think about my daughter's birthing experiences a lot because with my first daughter, fairly standard labor and delivery. And with my second daughter, she had her umbilical cord wrapped around her neck like 3 times. You look at pictures, I didn't realize it in the moment because the details are a bit blurry. Like, it's so surreal at that moment. You're not taking things in as you normally would, but now I look at pictures and she was like purple, and it was like getting to there, like, you got to push, like we got to get her out. Her heart rate was dropping. And
Mhm.
I look at her and her personality now. And like this little girl is like such a fighter. And like she just
Mm.
has that like intensity about her. And like there's no denying it. And I can only like pin that to this has to be because that is how you entered this world of like you were fighting for your life. And you know, it's wild to think that that situation that they seemingly unaware of, or like it wouldn't be impactful to them, like it can really shape us, and our time in the womb can shape us. And it's just wild. It's just wild to think about. And it is like it's a lot of pressure that we put on mothers. And like that's the thing too, the mother-child bond is like so delicate, right? And I'm seeing
Mm.
it now in like how critical my preteen can be of me as a mother. And then I have to reflect and be like, I think I've been that critical of my mother my entire life, you know? And I do think that we're very critical of our mothers because there is that special bond, because you will never have that relationship with anyone else, that
Mhm.
closeness, that attachment that you have with your mother. And like some of us don't want to look at that for what it is, what, and like you talked about anger and resentment, and I think that's a lot of times what we build towards our mother is like this anger and resentment, when it's a huge role to play. It's literally like the biggest role you'll like. I was reading a book and it's like, who actually signs up for this shit? Like, it's literally the most stressful, like, just the most pressure driven role you could actually choose for yourself. And we're like actively signing up for it. So I do think that I know that all mothers are not perfect, but as a child, like I do think there is something to be said about finding forgiveness and grace for our mothers who are just doing, and our fathers, I mean, who are just doing the best that they can. Because at the end of the day, if we're not finding that, we're the ones suffering. You know, you can harbor
Mm.
as much anger, resentment, regret, whatever as you want. And at the end of the day, it's impacting you and your life. And if you are a mother, your children, and if you are married, your spouse, and you know, everything. So
Mhm.
I think letting that piece go is really challenging for people. I have found in my own personal work, but also with my clients, like that is something we struggle with. Like, how do you let go of something that is so it's part of you, you know? And so letting go of those feelings can be really challenging. So I don't know if you have any insight on that.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm like, where do I start? There's so many things I want to say. We've talked about how deeply this impacts us and how it just happens automatically. It's not like, the mom, sometimes maybe the mom has malicious intent or something like that, but I think that's probably rare. And I just, I do not have human children. I have a dog child. I have plant children. But I really, the more healing I do, the more I'm like, wow, the mother's role might be the most important. Like when we say we want to change the world, like it starts with the children and how we raise them. And then beyond that, it's about repair, right? Being able to repair and like recognize and own like our humanness of like, yeah, I fucked up in this situation. I should have been better. Like that's really what healing's about, is like bringing that loving awareness and taking the shame and the blame out of it. Because here's the thing, again, I keep saying this and I really feel called to say it again, is that society is not set up to help mothers flourish. It's not. It isn't. And um for a long time, I think as women, we've been in the victim role. We're victims to society. We're victims to men. And you see this beautiful movement now of empowerment, women's empowerment. And I think, for me, what that really means is like reclaiming our emotional intelligence and the wisdom that comes from our emotions and having healthy relationships to our emotions, because that's what allows us to repair is being able to like, yeah, okay, I feel really crappy about this. Like, let me work through that. So when you talk about how do we let go of this, it really is feeling the emotions. And people don't like that answer because it's like, that doesn't feel good. And I'm like, that's the point. We've been avoiding our emotions and suppressing them and shutting them down and shutting the feminine down with it and continuing the mother wound with it because emotions have not been, it's been like a taboo subject until maybe like 10 years ago, right? So, this is the work is, and I've been talking about it a lot lately because it's like we want the feminine energy to be healthy on our planet. We want the masculine energy to be healthy on our planet and come together and support each other and create a new society that like really supports people in their life and like nurtures people and abundance for all those beautiful concepts that I think most people want. They want their kids to grow up in a society that's safe and be able to survive and thrive in this world. How we do that is we start to reclaim our emotional intelligence, I think, and allowing that feminine to rise. And so, like, feeling your emotions is just, it's the way forward, it's the way through. And it's one of the most difficult things that a lot of people go through because we have not been taught how to do that, how to process emotions in a healthy way. And to me, like when you talk about forgiveness, like, oh my gosh, absolutely. Like forgiveness is key. But what I have people focus on, and you probably know this from our healing circles we do in our women's group, is sometimes it is beneficial to forgive the other person, but most times the person that needs forgiveness is yourself, and that can take a lot of the pressure off of like, okay, I had a strained relationship or there was a lot of conflict. I wasn't perfect, they weren't perfect. Maybe just focus on yourself. So if you have a really like contentious conflicted relationship with somebody, including your mother, maybe just take her out of it for the moment and just focus on feeling your own emotions to that, feeling the resentment. Like we stuff that stuff down, feeling that anger, creating safe spaces to feel that, to feel the grief, because that is part of that healing that mother wound and just becoming to me like a whole healthy adult with balanced energy is grieving the humanness of our parents. They were never meant to be everything for us because we were meant to find that for ourselves, right? And I really feel like you just talking about your daughter's story of how she's got this beautiful fighting spirit. It's like, okay, maybe there was a wound there that she might have to work through at some point in her life, but also it gave her an incredible gift. And I'm like getting chills as I say that because it's like the wounds are also gifts. If you have the courage to like look at it that way, to feel the emotions and use forgiveness and like return to love, seeing that, yeah, it's all been perfect because it shapes you exactly who you are today. Like if I hadn't had my experience with my mom and everything we've been through together, I wouldn't be here talking about this with you. And it's like, I love this. So, our plan, our life has this perfect path that we don't always understand. The wounds are there to serve you if you can have the courage to lean into them and find forgiveness. And then when it comes, find your voice too. We'll say that too, because that's an important part of reclaiming the feminine is being able to communicate our emotions in a healthy way as well. Even if that's just like, I need to write, journaling, like writing a letter to your mother, or just like finding a way to like express the emotion out in a healthy way. So like even like screaming into a pillow, you're using that throat, you're using your voice to kind of express it out into the world. So it doesn't just build up within us. But the last thing I'll say is the forgiveness with another person comes easily when you've resolved all the underlying emotions and conflicts. And if you find yourself having a really hard time forgiving yourself or somebody else for these things we're talking about is just because you haven't resolved the emotions. Because when they're resolved, it'll just be like, yeah, I get it, it's okay. Like it really hurt me. They were hurting and I've processed it and I'm now like good with my own self and I'm ready to forgive that. So that's my like little rant on how do we like move forward from this.
Yeah, and I do love that you said you do have to get to forgiveness because people hate to hear that, and you don't want to feel
Yeah.
forced to do that because you're not ready to do that. And that's okay, but I do want to like shout it from the rooftops that you will not find a fully healed version of yourself without finding that forgiveness for that person and of course with yourself. But a lot of times that forgiveness to that person is really challenging because they've hurt us on multiple levels. They've impacted our lives greatly. And so, yeah, the last thing we want to do is be like, oh, it's okay, no big deal, I'll just brush it off. Like, but because it's not a big deal. And you shouldn't have to brush it off. That's the thing. And I think that people do want validation. It's not okay. A lot of times it's not okay what happened to us as children. Okay. There's a lot of people that go through some shit that's not okay for a child, period. And that's unfortunate. And if that is your reality, it's only harming you at this point to keep carrying it. And I love that you struck on the emotion of grief because I do think that for most of us, that's a huge part of it. And grief is one of, in my opinion, the most complex emotions because it has so many, like it has like these arms and legs, right? Like because it is 1 minute it's sadness and 1 minute it's anger and 1 minute it's frustration and then it's resentment and it's like, and then it's like doubt or it's like fear that you're never going to get over it. And it's like just all these emotions piled into this one emotion of grief. And so you do that. Grieving is a process, and grieving the childhood or the love or the nurturing or the guidance or the support or the safety that you did not receive, that's a big like hurdle, and that is a big fucking mountain to climb. And so I just want to add that because I understand if you're listening to this and you're like, fuck that. The last thing I'm finding is forgiveness for all this stuff that I didn't have a say in, that I didn't deserve. I get it. I hear you. I feel you. And I love you enough to tell you that like, it is the way. It's the way to your freedom. It's the way to repairing. It's the way to breaking the cycles,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I know, go if you have anything to speak on that,
No,
go
I'm
ahead.
just like say it, Sarah. Like I'm totally in agreement with you, but I'll keep going.
So, and then the thing that I'll add to that, because I know that sometimes, and I do want you to speak to this, because those of you that aren't familiar with Emily's story, so Emily was in a very tragic helicopter accident and lost her mother and her stepfather in that accident. And so you don't have your mother here to repair that relationship. I'm finding this is totally, and this goes back to what you were saying, taking your wounds and making something out, realizing that they're here for you. This is actually what you were meant to process, what you were meant to experience so that you could either help others, help yourself, help your family, help the future generations. Like we are given these things for a reason. And I'm seeing, and this is like a total unexpected benefit of me starting my business, is that I have been repairing my relationship with both my parents. And it's been like this fucking roller coaster of a ride, but it's like beautiful, And I'm very lucky to have two parents that are willing to like take a look and to talk and to be